How's it going? Welcome to the live stream. I'm starting to monitor the live stream on YouTube, but I'm streaming from another platform. So I may not see your questions if you're writing in the chat. But we're going to give it a few minutes just to let people stumble along and find their way in. In the meantime, we'll listen to this AI generated chill music. All right. Looks like we got a couple people watching. So I'll shut off the music. We can kind of just jump in and get started as people trickle in. But yeah, so just want to give a quick introduction of myself if you don't know who I am. I've been building AI systems for over a decade now. Spent a lot of that time building and training teams. And in particular, I do a lot of work to upskill software engineers to do AI more effectively. And today, really, I just want to walk through kind of building a real RAG system. So I'm going to do everything live here. I haven't really done much of any prep work. I've done very minimal things. I set up some environment variables so I don't accidentally share those on screen. I did some work to collect some queries that we might use for the to evaluate the system. But ultimately, I'm going to pretty much be starting from scratch, and you're going to see me bumble through literally everything. So, what I really hope to show from this is one, even an expert forgets things a lot, looks up things a lot, uses AI tools. And so, you shouldn't feel like you can't do things just because you have to Google things or use AI. And also, I think there's a lot of dread that people feel trying to jump in and build certain AI systems, like a RAG system, or building out evals. And I just want to show that there's a very incremental way you can do things so that each step you take is not overwhelming. And that's typically how I do every project I work on, whether it's been in past career roles or with consulting clients. And so I just want to show you how I tend to work through problems, and hopefully that's helpful to you. Eventually, this app is all going to be open sourced. There's a GitHub repo with Miroscope, chat with docs. We'll make sure to put a link to that in the notes when the video is posted on YouTube. And there'll be multiple live streams, I imagine, around this project. Today, really, what I hope for us to get through is really just the very basic implementation of a working RAG system. So one real key part of my process is really taking incremental steps, like I said, which means we're not going to have a really sophisticated RAG system at the end of this. We're going to do the simplest thing that works at each step. And so we're only going to incrementally add complexity, and we're only going to add the complexity if it's like actually improving something. So without further ado, I'm going to check the chat on YouTube real quick just to make sure no one's asking anything. Cool. So I'll try to go back to the YouTube chat every once in a while, just in case folks are asking questions. But yeah, so now that we've kind of like gone through that, I put out like a little like numbered list of things we want to do and in the order we want to do them. So the first thing is I want to just build a simple chat app, and we're going to build this in the terminal for now. Eventually it'll be deployed as a web app. But I think the focus of this is really the AI part. And so the first thing I want to do is just get the skeleton scaffolding of a chat app. And so we'll build something in the terminal. And the first simplest thing to do is just have static responses from the bot. Then we'll get into adding tracking and instrumentation with a library called Lilypad. And then we're going to go through like it almost seems dumb to do, but an evaluation loop to evaluate how the system does with a static response, which obviously it's going to do awful. But that's just so we can validate and verify that our instrumentation works. So yeah, let's jump into that. So right over here, I have a main file. And so let me make sure this is like big enough for y'all to see. So I'm a big fan of using AI tools. So big fan of Claude Code right now. So I'll kind of like spin up Claude here. And so really, I have like a very simple thing to create a little console app. And so really what I'll say here is I'll ask Claude to build a very basic, minimal chat app. This first version should take user input and have a bot which always responds with a static hard-coded string of, let's make it therapy coded and say, okay, how does that make you feel? And then we can say, I'm very big on basically functional programming. And so I like using functions as boundaries between everything. And so I don't want Claude to go and build out a class. I just want it to have a simple function. So I'll say, please make the please make the bot a simple function which takes a user message and then returns the bot response, which again is the hard-coded string. And the other thing I want to say is like, because we're using rich, we might want to differentiate or distinguish between the bot and user. So use different colors for a bot message and user message. For instance, user message, where user would be in one color. The message itself should be regular text. All right. So we got that. We can see Claude chug away at this. And should be pretty straightforward, so it shouldn't take long for Claude to get through this. All right. And so I'll just check through and review this code real quick. So we have like our simple function with the bot response. It's exactly what I wanted. We'll probably have to change this as time goes on. So for instance, if we wanted to maintain conversation state, this doesn't have that. That's fine. We're starting super simple. And then we have our main function, and then while true, and we have a thing that allows us to enter a quit message. So that seems like exactly what we want, actually. So we'll go ahead and let Claude do that. So it seems like that part's done. So now we can just test and verify that that works. So let's go ahead and I have this set up with UV. So we can say UV run, chat with docs, main.py. And let me maybe make this a little bit bigger so folks can see. But you can see there's, it says welcome, tells you how to quit. So you can enter your message, and then I can say something like, hello, bot. And then the bot says, okay, how does that make you feel? And so then I could say, I am lost. And, because it essentially always returns that same hard-coded string, we just get the same thing back. and then we can type quit, and then it says goodbye. There's some things that I like don't totally love about this. One is that, this it has enter your message, and then it also like outputs it as user. We can kind of like let that go for now. I don't think that's like super important. We don't need to like spend a whole lot of time like making this perfect. So anyway, I think that this is a good place to start. And I think that that really captures, point number one of build the simplest chat app. So next thing we want to do is add tracking instrumentation. And the reason I do this first is because it's going to be the foundation for everything we do in our RAG app, just making sure that we like have visibility into what's going on. And that's going to help us focus our attention and efforts so we aren't wasting our time. A lot of people tend to build AI systems without having any evaluation in place, and they spend months of time implementing something that is obviously the fix, and then the end result is it's worse. And also, you can't tell that it's worse because you didn't have evaluations to begin with. So we're going to just like start with that right off the bat. The key insight, though, is we're not going to go overboard with the evaluation. We're going to have it very lightweight to start, because when we're starting out, we're looking for big changes. We're looking for, did we go from almost never working to sometimes working, or sometimes working to never working? So like in both directions there. So we don't need that many queries. We don't need like a sophisticated eval system. Really just need kind of like real rough sense to help guide our efforts. And so the library that I like to use is something called LilyPad. So LilyPad is a pretty simple to implement. I'm not even going to ask Claude to do this just because it is so simple. Configure, and then we'll say auto LLM equals true. So you always have to call configure. But the way that you use LilyPad basically is on the thing that you want to track, you can say at lilypad.trace. And LilyPad has some nice functionality where it can automatically version your functions. So basically, as we change our bot response function, it will actually be able to tell us the different versions over time and how different versions perform. And so that'll be great because we're going to do a lot to this over the course of this live stream and future live streams. There's one other thing that I need to do. I do need to make sure that we have .env, because that's how I'm using or setting my environment variables. So let me just make sure. Okay, so I don't think I've added .env, so I need to do that here. Uh-oh, I don't know why. Oh, there we go. Okay, so uv add python.env. So now we got that into the thing. And then I can say from .env, load .env, and then we want to load .env there. So now we've loaded our environment variables, we've configured LilyPad, and then we have a trace. And so now we can verify that it works just by basically rerunning that chat app. And then using a message. And so this is kind of like popping out and having the trace. We can go in and edit that later, but this is useful so that we can click the trace basically. So let's go ahead and follow that. Oh, this opened in another window. Let me pop over here. So now we can see that our bot response function was called here. We can even click on this function. We can see bot response is here. And it even has the code for us. And we can look at traces. And we have this one trace. When we pop that open, we can see that there's this input of a user message saying, hey, and then this is the output. And that's what we expect. So cool. We can see that our tracing works. So you know, already we're 15 minutes in and we have gotten through building that simple chat app and adding tracking instrumentation. The next thing I wanted to do was start to collect some queries. We want to have something that is uh, repeatable and reproducible to run through. And so we want to collect a few queries that just are things users might ask. And so this is going to be, again, a chat app that's about asking questions about the Miroscope docs. And so when people have questions about how to do something in Miroscope, they might use this little chatbot. And so a great place to kind of like source some of those queries is the Miroscope Slack channel. I actually already went through and collected some of those just so you don't have to watch me bumble around and try to find good examples. But I forwarded myself 1, 2, 3, 4 queries. And that might be good for now. Just as something to get started with. So anyway, we can essentially just copy each of these and create files for them. So let me go ahead and quit out of our chat app. And then now we basically just want to create a file that has all of these queries. And so I'll just create. Generally speaking, I like to put things in like a JSON file. That's like usually pretty simple for me. And I usually like to add some metadata. So I think for now, the only thing that we really need to add is like an example ID. And that's sometimes helpful for logging. But we'll go ahead and touch and we'll say queries.json. Go ahead and open that. And so we can just make this like a list, and then we'll say like example ID. We can say 1 and then query. And we'll have a few of these. Let's go ahead and paste that in. So this is a place where like might be easier to put this into something like a markdown file, just because the formatting might have like extra stuff in it. So I might even do something like this. Actually, so just to make this a little bit cleaner, I'm just going to make a directory that's queries. And then I can do something like touch queries 0.md. Oops. I accidentally added an extra D. And then we'll just have our thing just load everything. But this is a case where, the formatting when I'm copying it from Slack isn't copied. It looks like I didn't even get the whole. Okay, no, that was actually it. So here's like one sort of question that we had there, and I can go ahead and kind of do a similar thing and get 1.md. So we'll add this. Oops, wrong hotkey. All right, we can do now that. And so we have this question. And notice how these questions, by the way, have like some level of complexity. Anytime you're finding the queries that you want to use, you want to make sure that they're like representative of queries that users actually ask. I could have started with like very simple or easy queries, but I think the reality here is like these are the types of questions people actually ask. And so if we want to make sure our system is like actually helpful, we should kind of use something that's like that. So there we go. And so that's stack trace, and this should be Python. So we get the nice syntax highlighting, and then last query. And over time, 5 queries is not a lot. And so over time, we're definitely going to have more than 5 queries or 4 queries, I mean. But it's okay to start with just a few queries. So don't be worried that you don't have enough queries, as long as they are kind of like roughly representative. You definitely need to be careful that you're not being led astray, but it's not that only having 4 queries is useless. So I think that let me just check this message, make sure I didn't miss any formatting. I think that is correct. Okay, cool. So now we have all those queries in there. And so now I want to create a script to help me run an evaluation. This is a case where we can basically just import the function, the bot response function. And so we're going to go ahead and do that. When we're making an evaluation script generally, it might be that your AI function that you need to trigger is behind an API endpoint. And at some point in this project, we'll kind of get to that, I imagine. But for now, it's pretty straightforward for us to just import this function and then call it directly. And so I'm going to go back to Claude, and I'm going to want Claude to do something for us. And so I'm actually going to clear, just because we're starting a new task with Claude. And so it doesn't need to like consider things before. So what I'll tell Claude now is I have a directory of markdown files in, and then I'll tag the folder. Each markdown file contains a single query. I want to construct an evaluation script, which takes as an argument the directory of query files. And the script should do the following. Oh, shoot. I accidentally pressed enter too quick. So it should do the following. One, load all the markdown files into some in-memory structure. I'm not really opinionated on what. Maybe I'll say like, maybe JSON with an ID attribute derived from the file name, and a content attribute being the content from the file. And then 2, for each query, pass the content to bot response. And so I think that's all that we need for now. And so while it's generating, I guess we'll go back and check So somebody in the chat asked, what's LilyPad best for? I think in general, like if you're implementing pretty much any system that you want observability on, and you're going to like be making changes to it that you need to evaluate, I really think LilyPad is a great option because of the version tracking. So it's definitely something that I would consider and check out in that case. All right, so it looks like Claude finished some stuff up. And so let's just go ahead. It has an evaluate.py script that it made. So let's just check out what it generated so we can kind of keep in mind. So it looks like it imported an unused thing, but let's look through the code just to make sure we're understanding what's going on. So load queries. So it takes the query directory and then it returns this list of dict string any. I don't really like this because I would rather it return like an actual object. And so probably we'll come back and do that. And so actually, maybe I should just do it right now. So like from Pydantic, import base model, organize inputs, and then we'll go ahead, boom. And then the tab autocomplete is that. Cool. Cool. So this goes through, gets all the files, and then for the MD file. So it gets the file name here. So perfect. Reads the text. Cool, cool. That all looks fine. And for evaluate queries, we load the queries, and then for every query, processing query ID, and then we print out the query. I think this is going to make the log messy, the output, so I'm just going to delete that for now, and also delete this. And then now we can change that given we change to a Pydantic base model structure. Yeah, and so this is like catching every exception. I think that's fine because we're going to want to like run every query we can. Sometimes this will mean like if there's like a non-transient failure, it might mean that we, hit an exception on everything. But I think for now that's fine. Using arc parse for the queries directory, and it's a positional argument. So yeah, so overall this looks good. So now let's go ahead and try it out. So now, again, uv run, evaluate.py, and the queries directory is just queries. And so we do that. Query ID 0, 1, 2, 3. And we see that we got the traces there. So let's pop back over into LilyPad. And we now see that we have multiple traces here. And we have the whole user message here. There. Here. So we have everything that we expect. Obviously, so the other thing that we can do in LilyPad here is we could go ahead and assign these to be annotated. So if I go ahead and assign these to myself, I now have like a little annotations queue that I can jump into, and then I have these to annotate. There's lots of different things you can do. You can provide pass or fail with some reasoning. You can add comments, all sorts of stuff you can do. But like we know that because it always outputs, how does that make you feel? Probably this isn't something that we want. And so we can go ahead and mark them all as fail. So let's see. So annotated that top one. And so now we've annotated all of those. And if we go back to this function and open this up, we can see that, it's failing it gets 0 out of 4 correct. And so it's like at 0%. And so that's what we expect. So everything's good. We're kind of like in the place that we want to be. Let's jump back and just like look again at our little notes of what we want to do. We've basically done steps 1 through 3, and we're like 30 minutes in. So I think we're making good progress. So now we're getting to the point to where we maybe want to start to use an LLM. And I know we said we're going to build a RAG system, and we'll get there, I promise. We don't need to jump straight to that, though. Maybe it's the case that the model already knows enough to answer some of these questions. And so we don't need to jump straight to a full-fledged RAG system. We can take the next small step. Let's just take the step to change this hard-coded function to use an LLM. And because we're answering questions about Miroscope, we might as well use Miroscope. So this is another thing that I think is like pretty straightforward for me to do. So I'm not going to ask Claude to do it. But basically, we now want this bot response to actually be like an LLM function. And so let's go ahead and import what we need from Miroscope. And so from Miroscope, we're going to import LLM and prompt template. And so I'm going to go ahead and do this. And so with Miroscope, you can define prompt templates that are, I think, just in a single string. And it's a nice system. You'll see how it kind of like works out, but you can kind of in one string put multiple message types. So I'm going to first start with a system message that says, you are a helpful assistant that can answer questions about the Miroscope library. And I'm just going to give it some real basic information about Miroscope. And there are many ways to do certain things in Miroscope. I'm just going to give it the most basic information about how to write an LLM function in Miroscope. Below is an example of a basic Miroscope program. And so we'll go ahead and put this in that. And so we can do this. And it like actually auto-completed something. But we'll take that. So we'll say something like class. And I think like Miroscope on their website actually might have like a good example. So let's just rip that same example like in their quick start. Let's see. Guides, docs. Yeah, this is the thing that we want. Yep, cool. So we're just going to copy this example that's in there rather than kind of like writing our own. And so now we can see this sort of example. We have an issue with, we have triple quotes here. I actually don't know how exactly to escape those. I guess you can just do this, and that should escape it. Cool. So now we have sort of an example in here, and cool. Then we'll say you should answer the user's question about Miroscope using everything you know about the library. And what it knows about the library is just what's in the weights in this one example that I provided. And so who knows what it is? I don't know what's going to be in the model weights, but this is, I think also we need to escape this actually. Yeah, so who knows what it's actually going to be in the weights, but we're going to find out. And so the other thing we're going to do is create a user message that's going to be like whatever the user message that's passed in. So the nice thing about Miroscope is now I don't need to even have a body here for the function, because what I'm going to do is add an LLM call and then add a prompt template. And I don't need a response model right now because it's going to be a string. And really what we're going to need to do here is now this kind of actually returns something slightly different. And so actually what we want the bot reply to be here is to do .content. And we're using 4.0 mini, but maybe we can use a different model here. Like maybe we'll just use 4.0 and we'll just see what happens. But yeah, and so this is kind of like the setup of a Miroscope function. that took like 5 minutes to walk through and explain it. So now that we have that, we can verify that it works. And I want to verify that it works with like the chat app first and just make sure that we get something that makes sense. And so I'll say run. Tell me why I should use Miroscope. And so actually, none type object has no attribute content. So I messed something up here. Let's find out what I messed up. So user message. Wonder if there's something wrong with my... I think there might be something wrong with this, because I don't know how that would return none. I think there was something wrong with how I escaped that, maybe. Let's try that again. Why should I use Miroscope? Mm-mm. And so now we get the thing from this. Miroscope's Python library designed to simplify and enhance, has ease of use, makes unit testing more intuitive and straightforward. Framework compatibility, it boosts productivity, has integration capabilities, rich features. I don't know if this actually comes from anything Miroscope publishes, or if 4.0 is just making stuff up, but we at least see that the LLM function is being called, which is kind of the important thing, which means that sort of my something about my my example was not formatted correctly. So I'm going to jump back in and try to put that back in and look at what I might have messed up here. I think this might just need this. Oops. I need to think about this. I think probably the easiest thing that I can do is the following. So I'm just going to say like this. So I'll say example Miroscope program, and then I'm going to basically paste this. So we're going to paste that in, and then here I'm going to do I'm going to explain why I'm doing it like I'm the way that I'm doing it. So the thing that we want to avoid is this here getting replaced, or Miroscope thinking that this is an argument. And so the thing that I'm going to do is use dynamic configuration. And so one thing you can do with Miroscope is you can return something called a computed fields. And you can do this. And this allows you to like dynamically create arguments to inject into the prompt template. And so we'll see if this works now. Because I think there's probably something about how we were injecting the image or the example. Why should I use Miroscope? Cool. So we got that. And by the way, if we go into LilyPad again and go to our functions, notice we have up to V4. And that's because I tried it a few different times, right? So like V2 was that first attempt that I made of changing it to the LM function. And then we tried it removing the example. And now I tried it by putting the example in a different way. And all of those have been tracked as separate functions. And I didn't have to do anything special. LilyPad just took care of it. So that was pretty awesome. So now that we got that, I think we are kind of like ready to just try it. Let's see what happens when we run our evaluation now. So UV run, evaluate. So while it's going, I'll go back to the chat again. So it looks like some folks are saying the font is too small. I'm sorry about that. I'm zooming in now. Hopefully that helps. So Miroscope is here, and they're saying that Claude 4 knows a surprising amount about Miroscope. And then also I could have used single quotes for the prompt template, and then some stuff about needing double brackets for escape. Looks like we're on like the last query here. And so now we got all of our things here. So let's go ahead and check in LilyPad what we have. And again, we're on V4. We can check out the traces. We have down here, why should I use Miroscope? That's like the dummy one that I put in just for testing. So let's go ahead and annotate the others for our evaluation. And so now I can go down to my annotation queue. And so, so let's see what happens here. So the user's asking, what's the best way to create a prompt with system part and user part consisting of a dynamically constructed set of text and image URLs? So let's see. Let's break down your options. Constructing image URL part instance manually. If your manually constructed image URL part instances, you can indeed return a list of message parts by directly constructing image URL part. Using computed fields with the URL image syntax. Wow. I'm looking at this, and I think this is actually surprisingly good of an answer. There might be some subtle things that are wrong with it, but I think it's actually it's hitting some things that I know to be somewhat true in Miroscope. So that's kind of nuts to me. Interesting. So already we can see that, the LLM itself might know some stuff about it. We're still going to go through to get to the adding RAG for sure. But just want to point out, like, sometimes the LLM is like good enough on its own for some problems. So let's see. So this is asking a question about Azure. And one thing we can like do to kind of like verify in all of these questions that I ripped, we can jump into the message and see what the Miroscope team. So Will's answer here, you can use prompt template and computed fields where image URLs will get automatically converted, or you can return messages.type and do everything in the body, but you have to construct the image URL part yourself. And if you like look at this first thing here, that's more or less what this thing says. So that's actually like an awesome answer, I think. And so I'm going to go ahead and annotate that as a pass. There might be something in there that is like kind of wrong, but really at the moment we're going for like really coarse grained, like to help us get directional guidance on where to go. And so I'm going to go ahead and annotate that as a pass. And so now this next one is the thing about Azure. And so we can go back to here and grab the Azure question. Here it is. And so since you're using the Azure OpenAI client, you'll need to set the provider to OpenAI. So that's something that was like pretty uh, simple, but like maybe not documented. And so we'll see. Error you're encountering indicates the Azure OpenAI client does not have a complete method, blah, blah, blah. Here's how you can correctly implement the Azure OpenAI integration. So really like looking at this is actually telling, I think, Miroscope developers how they could fix their implementation or something like that. It's not telling the user what they can do to get around it. And so this is a fail. And so we'll look at this one. Big pain point, getting rate limited by Anthropic. Miroscope has retry fallback. Can someone point to documentation so I can read more about how this works? Ideally, I would like to catch errors like 429, then go try another service like OpenAI. You can configure Miroscope to automatically retry requests upon encountering exceptions or status code. This can be useful for temporary sporadic rate limiting, fallback logic, et cetera, et cetera. And so this actually includes some Python code using a fallback condition. I don't know if that actually exists. So let's just go check. So if we go to the Miroscope docs, there's a section on retries. And we can see Miroscope.retries has fallback errors and fallback. I don't think fallback condition actually exists. So I think that I'm going to mark this actually as false. It looks like it's hallucinating some things. So we'll go ahead and fail this one. And then here we use Miroscope for text classification and extraction. Is there an option to change max tokens? And so this is asking about some call parameters you might want to provide. So in Miroscope, you can set various parameters for LLM calls, including max tokens. The LLM call decorator allows you to specify several parameters directly, such as provider, model, response model, client, and max tokens. Your use indicates that you want to change max tokens in the decorator. While you mentioned that you tried modifying it in the decorator and didn't work, it appears you have placed max tokens equals 100 directly in the LLM call decorator. This should work as long as the value is correctly set and compatible with the model's capabilities. If it didn't work, there are a few things you want to check, blah, 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 blah. But if we go and look at the Slack thread around this, this message, you can pass max tokens via call params. And so you can't just pass it as a blanket argument. It has to be in this call params dictionary. And so actually, this is a fail too. So now we can go back to our functions and we can see that, hey, we did a little bit better. We added LLM capability and we're now doing a little bit better. So we went from nothing works to, hey, now 25% works. And that's pretty cool. I'm going to pause to take a look at the chat real quick. Somebody said video resolution is 720p max. Yeah, I wonder if there's something I can do on the streaming side to like make this better. I actually don't know. Orientation selection. Yeah, I don't think I have like a it says 720p in my thing. I don't know how to change settings on that. Let's see. I will try to fix that for the future. Yeah, so it looks like while I'm live, I can't change the resolution, but I'll try to fix that for the next live stream. So let's jump back to our sort of like notes and our little list that we have going. So we built the chat app, we added tracking instrumentation, we got some queries for an eval set, we replaced the hardcode function with an eval, we ran an eval loop. So now let's get into the RAG part. Now we want to like make sure we're actually using some documentation. So now we have a real question of like, where do we get the documentation? So there's lots of things you could do at this point. You could go use Firecrawl and like crawl the Miroscope's documents. You could go try to check out the Miroscope repository, build the docs, probably. Um, Lots of different things you can do. A really dumb, simple thing we can do, again, do simple things first, is we can really just rip the llms.txt. And so I'm going to get a link off screen real quick so you don't see my text messages. But let's see. So nearscope.com. On text. Cool. So, okay. So over here on the Miroscope page, there's an LLM's text. And then we can click this. So basically, this is concatenated markdown docs intended for use by LLMs. So we can copy each of these. Like every page seems to have one. Or we can go to this LLM's text full. And this is everything. So this is just the markdown of all the docs. So when we think about like how big this is, we can go ahead and just like basically download this file. So I'm going to go ahead and just create a local file real quick that has the Miroscope docs. So I'll say pb paste Miroscope docs. And now we can get like how many characters are in Miroscope docs. How do I get the number of characters in a file, markdown file? If you don't use shell sage, you're missing out. I forget how to do things in my terminal all the time. So word count -m. And so we see the reason I'm getting the number of characters is I'm curious to find out how many tokens roughly this is. And so just as like a dumb rule of thumb, I usually use, which is totally not accurate, but it's usually like close enough. So when I look at this, I'm like, this is roughly 260,000 characters. And, roughly like 4 characters per token. And so this is like 65,000 tokens. So my first thought is like, can we just throw the entirety of the documentation in? That's something we could do. Because I said we were going to do RAG, though, we'll go through the sort of process of doing RAG. So the first thing that we have to do is, this is sort of a bunch of pages. And so we want to like kind of find a way to split this. So, like looking at this, when we if we like scroll through this to try to get a sense of like how we should split it, it seems like we have, these top level headers. So there's like this table of contents. The table of contents on its own doesn't seem super helpful. We have some HTML. So I don't know how much of that we have. We have H2s that are like getting started, Miroscope API, cetera, et cetera. Provider SDK equivalent. Okay, so I'm starting to see that like each page seems to be kind of like captured within this content. And so I think that a pretty easy way for us to split this is going to be to just split on these content brackets, basically. And so we'll use that to try to get pages. A different way you could do this, by the way, is if you didn't want to just download this whole thing. This is, I think, going to be roughly equivalent to just like page by page copying. But you know, again, I'm trying to be dumb and simple. So here's where I would kind of like go back to Claude, and I would basically, again, let's go ahead and clear what Claude knows because we're going to start a new thing. And so I'm going to say I now have a very large markdown document containing all the documentation for Miroscope and Miroscope docs. I would like to construct a system which chunks this by page. A page is identified by content between a content. I should say this content tag. Can you create a chunker which returns the pages given a single markdown document? And so this is something that I think when you think about like chunking your documents, if your documents aren't changing very often, you only want to do that, you don't want to do that every single time your user asks a question. And so this is actually a separate process. It shouldn't be in our script. So I'm going to tell Claude, please create a separate script, which given the path to a markdown file and the path to a directory will create create one markdown file per page. And so I think that is mostly what we need to give it. I think the other thing that I do want to tell it is there is a title for the thing. So I can say the content tag has a title attribute, which can be used for the name of the subsequent page files. So now we'll let that rip. Miroscope says if I bump my Miroscope version to latest, it should render more nicely in the UI. I will keep that in mind for the next stream. So this is trying to just update this script to be executable. Since I'm running everything through UV, I don't need that. I run everything with UV run, so we do not need to be executable. And so now this is kind of like trying to test it on some test input. So let's look at the test input that it created just so we kind of have an idea. Um, Also awesome that Claude is opting to test its own code. And so you can see it does this. It also has some headers up here, which we, by the instructions I gave, we're expecting it to be ignored. And so it has a couple of different things. So I think that this looks good. So I'm going to go ahead and say yes, go ahead and do that. And now if we look at the files that were generated, we see test output and we can see examples.md, API reference, getting started. So that's pretty cool. So I think we got that. So this looks like Claude identified some kind of error. I want to see what it did. Okay, so it included the closing content tag, and that's just like not something that's needed in this. So it's trying to get rid of that. So I think that this is a good thing to run. And we can see that now that it ran it, it basically fixed that. So it's cool that I didn't even notice that and Claude did. And so now we're just going to remove that test output and the test input that we created. So cool. So now we have a way to basically chunk our the Miroscope documents. So that's pretty sick. So now looking at what we have here, we can say UV run, and the script that we have is, let me go ahead and remove queries.json. And then we have this scripts directory called chunk markdown. And so I'm going to say UV run scripts chunk markdown .py. And the thing that we need to give it, let me go ahead and just like look at the arguments that it takes. So the arguments is input and then output. So we're going to say Miroscope docs. And then we're going to say, we'll give it like a doc chunks. And so now if we look at doc chunks, we got a bunch of stuff in there. Cool. So just like kind of thinking back to what we have, let me just close some of these files we're not using. So we've now collected the documentation and chunked it. The next thing I want to do is actually create a way to search over it. And so we'll do something like pretty simple here, but the library that I generally start with is BM25S. So if we this is basically a lexical search implementation. And so we can go ahead and use this. It works pretty well. BM25 is a great place to start. And so again, we're assuming our documentation is maybe not changing that much. And so this is, again, an async process we want to run. One thing I'm not sure of off the top of my head is whether we can save or like how we save it. And so we can save it with this. And then load it with that. And so what I'm going to do is copy this and jump in. And first I'm going to add the dependency, BM25S. So now that we have it, and then I'm going to go in, and again, we're doing a new thing with Claude. So we're going to say clear, and I'm going to say create a script in the scripts directory, which outputs a BM25 index using the BM25S library. You can see an example of how to do that in the link I share later. And then I'll say the script should take a directory path as argument and an output path. The directory will contain many markdown files. Each should be considered a separate document in the index. Here is BM25S document, quick start. Cool. So we'll give it all that. We'll wait for this to go. We'll let it fetch content from GitHub. Still going, still going. So it looks like it created a file now. So we can go look at the file that it made. So it looks like it finished it. So let's go ahead and check it out. I'm just gonna make a few edits. First of all, we're running things through UV. We don't need the shebang up here. This is something that Will from Miroscope's always going to get on me about, so we'll fix that right now using lowercase list. So, yeah, so this goes through, loads down all the markdown files. And so we have all the documents there. And then we build the index by tokenizing. We're using English stop words, build it, index, save the index, and then it's saved to output path. So that's pretty much exactly what we want. So now let's go ahead and try it. So looking here, we can basically say, let's just check where everything is. So we have the doc chunks directory. So we can say uv run. And then we need to provide this. So build BM25 index. And then we want to provide it the doc chunks directory, which is the input. And then, like looking at this, we might call it something like that. And so we'll say we want to call it like Miroscope index. So now we have a Miroscope index. And so now the next thing to do is to like actually integrate it and build the RAG system. And then we'll run through an evaluation and then we'll wrap up. So I'll kind of like actually code more of this just because I think it might be helpful. So we now have some documents that we're going to want to include. I don't know how many we should include. I'm just going to guess maybe it's useful to include 3. I don't have any real sense or idea of like what makes sense here. And by the way, we did a pretty just straightforward chunking. It may be the case that that's not the right chunking. We don't really need to worry about it. Just do the simplest thing first, and then we'll let the evaluation guide what changes we make. And so now what we need to do is add a few things. So the first is we're going to want to have a way to pass in the documents here. And so probably what I tend to do is maybe the thing we want to do is pass in a list of strings here in addition to that. And I always like to format this stuff a little bit. There might be a better way to do this, but typically how I tend to do it is something like docs rendered. And then, you can do something like put each doc in between like these lines. And, I think that tends to be like a pretty decent way to do things. And then we can say docs rendered. And then up here, we can also say below is some relevant documentation for the library for you to use. And we can do this, docs rendered, boom. And so now we're expecting that there's something that's passed in. To make things backwards compatible, maybe we do something like this, you know, and then we say that. And so now you can still just call it with a user message. But now we need something that actually calls this. And so, or fetches these. And so we're essentially going to need something that loads the index if it's not already loaded. And then we're going to want to fetch the documents that we need using that BM25 index. And then we're going to want to pass those into this. And so sort of like the structure that I want here, you know, I might actually like rename this thing to be like bot response with docs. And I'll show you why I'm going to do that in a second. I'm going to make another function now that's called get docs. And this is going to take the user message and return our list of strings. We'll implement that in a second. And then the other thing I'm going to do is actually get a bot response here. We can maybe make this return a string, you know. But really what I'm going to do is use this to call get docs and then return the get bot response. And that way the interface kind of stays the same here. And now the other thing I want to do is these are going to be regular functions. They're not going to use LLMs, but we can still trace them. And because this is the same name, this is going to get updated as like a new version of that original annotation. And we can also trace our method to do retrieval. And so one thing I'm also going to do is basically just like something to load the index from a file. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to like cache this in memory so it's only done once. Cool. And so now to like implement this is like pretty straightforward. And so, you know, this is sort of the way that we do that. And so right now we'll just like hard code the file name. You know, you might want to use an environment variable or something else to configure this, but for now this will suffice. We need to import a few things. So let's import those. So now we got the, now we got the corpus. And so we can get the index. And then if we look at sort of the documentation here, sorry, it's so small. But the way that we actually retrieve is to do these two things, basically. So we need to tokenize, and then we need to, you know, use query tokens there. So and so this is going to be user message. We're not going to pass any arguments there. And then we now have like results and scores. For now, we just care about results. And so we don't really need that. And then we said that we would pass in like 3, but let's like also just like add a k argument that we can like update later. And so now we have something that gets the docs. And so now we get the docs from that, and then we return the bot message with docs. And so that all looks fine to me. So now let's make sure this works. And then now I'll say, tell me the benefits of using Mirroscope. And see if this actually works. Oh, we're again getting this none type thing. Again, I probably did not escape something effectively. Let's see. I wonder if looking at it in LilyPad might make it clear what I messed up. Let me check. One thing I want to show also is notice that there are now 3 functions because we changed the name of one to be bot response with docs. This bot response v5 is now sort of our implementation that does the retrieval. And when we look at our trace now, we actually see that nested under it are the step to get the docs, which is retrieval. And then this is generation. So these are the 2 steps of RAG, retrieval, generation. And it's all nested under this. And so we can see that get docs was called. And so we have like this array. And then we have this. Okay. So the docs are like this array. I'm wondering if, because this looks like it's sort of a nested array. I wonder if that's like messing something up. So what I would probably do now is basically just look at the docs that are returned. So one thing I typically like to use, and I don't know if I've added it here, is IPDB. Whoa. Oh, oops. There we go, IPDB. And so basically here I can import IPDB and then set trace. Let's try that. I should use Mirroscope. Cool. And so now we basically just set a debugger. And so I can like basically just like look at what the type of docs is. And so it's a NumPy array. And so the thing that I'm curious in is, what is the shape? So this is not what I actually wanted it to be. So I think if I do, let's do something like length. So yeah, that's not what I sort of intend. So let's say, okay. So I think this is more of what I'm looking for. And so this just tells me that I basically, and if I kind of just look at, docs 0, 1, I get like the whole sort of thing there. It looks like the format that's returned is like a dictionary here. So we can look at type. And so we can look at what are the keys that are there. So it has an ID and text. And so really all I care about right now is this text. And so let me go ahead and just kind of like pull that out. And so with this get docs function, I have the results here. And so now for docs, I want to say, I'll say x dot text for x in results 0. And we'll say to list just in case. Boom, return docs. And now let's save that and let's quit. Now let's try to rerun this and see what the docs look like now. Tell me why I should use Miroscope. And so now when we look at the type of docs, see it's a list, and then we can look at the type of the first document. It's a string, and it's just the document. So that's more of what we want. So let's just check to see if that's what was causing the issue with our sort of escaping. So while that's going, I'll go back and check if there's anything in the chat. Is there a TypeScript equivalent of LilyPad? Not at the moment, but I think it's in development right now. Wait, using dashes instead of XML, that's against AI engineering best practices. It's not against AI engineering best practices, actually. The best practice is to use an unambiguous separator. Because that separator isn't used in the docs, as far as I can tell, it's unambiguous. Okay, so yeah, it looks like the issue with the docs was the thing. So now we can kind of like just to verify, we can go into LilyPad and see our trace here. So pretty awesome. So we got that. And you know, now this is like version 8 because we changed a bunch of stuff and it only has that one. And so now we can go back and, you know, coming back to our notes, the last thing that we really want to do is rerun an eval. I'm not going to go through and collect more queries on stream. So we'll just go through and run the eval on the queries we have and then wrap up. But I just want to point out, notice how much we got done. You know, like basically in an hour and a half, we've gone from nothing to a RAG implementation with an evaluation loop and setup. And it's been fairly straightforward. So we can go ahead and rerun the eval and here we go. So now it's going through and processing those. And the other thing that I want to point out, we use Claude for a lot of this. So let's see, like how much did it cost us? Just because I'm curious. So to build that whole thing cost less than $1. So, you know, pretty affordable, I would say. If you don't have 70 cents, I am sorry. But you might need that. So we'll go ahead and wait a little bit for this to roll through. We're using a bigger model, so it takes a little bit of time. Damn, some of you dropping off like flies. As soon as we get to the end, you're like, nah, don't need to see evaluation. You guys don't want to do evaluation. You don't even want to watch evaluation. Cool. So now we got through and we generated the traces for our function. Again, we're on version 8. So notice how quickly we rack up some versions, but it's really nice that it automatically generates these and it separates our traces by the versions. That way we can kind of like see. So again, you know, one of these, this first one down here, it was just like a little test one. And so we'll go ahead and assign the others. Oops. We'll assign the others to me. And then we'll go to, whoa. So, oh dear. Okay. So, this is because I added a parent, it has like all of the like sub things for me to also annotate, which is not really what I wanted to do. So I'm going to go ahead and remove some of these annotations from my queue. Mm-mm. Mm-mm. Bear with me while I clean this up. Do, 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 do. Here we go. Cool. So, best way to create a prompt with the system and user part. So, this is actually giving that same sort of answer from before that we thought was good. So, I'm going to go ahead and pass that. Azure AI, the error you're encountering, there's likely an issue with how the Azure OpenAI client is being used. Yeah, so this is incorrect. And I think this is one of the things that I'll put here is the correct thing to do is to make the provider OpenAI because the OpenAI client is being used, or I should say the OpenAI API format is being used. This is confusing, but probably not in the docs. And if it's not in the docs, that means we either need to update the docs to include that so that the LLM knows about it, or maybe we put it in the system prompt as like a very like targeted fix for this kind of thing. Let's go ahead and annotate that one. And so this one, the fallback stuff. So it even tells you like how to install the right thing, rate limit. Yep, these are sort of like all the things from the documentation. So I'm going to go ahead and mark that as pass. Mirror scope for text extraction, and then max tokens. And this actually gets it right with the call params now. If you tried specifying max tokens directly in decorator without including inside call params, that would explain why it didn't work. So then we'll go ahead and mark that as pass. And so now, again, let's go back. And we now see we started at 0%, went to 25%, and now we're at 75%. So we can see that we're getting better. And there's definitely like room for improvement. At this point, we're kind of, I would say, have saturated this evaluation set, which is why the next task would be, let's figure out more queries to run on. And so before our next live stream, I will essentially go and collect a larger evaluation set, and we'll start to work on other more targeted fixes, and also building a more automated evaluation loop. So really appreciate you tuning in. Feel free to hit me up on Twitter or LinkedIn. My Twitter handle is Skylar_B_Payne, Payne. Should be easy to find. But yeah, feel free to send me a DM if you have comments, questions, concerns about this. But yeah, would love to engage with you all, and really appreciate you dropping by.